Hi guys, I'm Danny, and I started a Sunday gym because I've noticed lately that people tend to go to colleges and universities without actually knowing why they're there. And afterwards, starting jobs that are unfulfilling. So I'm interviewing different professionals to see what they have to say and share their knowledge and experience with you. I hope you enjoy it. Right on. Jimmy, how you doing? Thanks for being with me, sir.
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. The program will be focused on three main questions. What do you do for a living? How did you get there? And how did you knew that this was the way to go? So, that's what you do for a living, please.
Of course, yeah, like I said, I really appreciate you having me. My name is Dr. Jimmy Moley. I'm an adult and sports psychiatrist based in the United States and specifically just outside of Cleveland, Ohio. So, my main job responsibility on a day-to-day basis is to treat the mental health of both athletes and high-performing individuals. I'm mostly focused in the outpatient setting, so in the office as opposed to being in the hospital. So I do, a mix of psychotherapy as well as medication management to both, treat mental illness in athletes and high-performing individuals, but also to understand how we can use mental health to really enhance performance and to really elevate athletic competition. So that's the general kind of day-to-day work that I do. I would say in
Well,
general,
that's a
I'm
very,
focused on.
very important work because, most athletes are in a peak physical condition. You don't see a lot of
Right,
overweight athletes,
right,
for good
right.
reason. And if people with such physical strength are not mentally well, I don't want to sound, disrespectful. I don't want to sound cruel because I'm not a cruel man, but that can be dangerous for them and for those around them if something happens mentally. I'm pretty sure you know what I'm talking about.
Oh, for sure. Right. And, we're seeing this more and more, I think, in the popular media and stories of athletes, who really have significant mental health challenges, on the most extreme end, the tragedies of athlete
Yeah.
suicide and, you know, um, just different safety concerns, right, that arise. But, what we're recognizing is that athletes face a variety of challenges, all the way
Oh, yeah.
from, mood, anxiety challenges to, eating disorders, substance use, all sorts of different illnesses that affect the broader population, but athletes specifically because they face so many unique stressors.
That's not a normal way of life. Their way of life is not a normal way of life. When I was a kid, I started noticing things, and most, I don't know how things are in the United States, but at least here in Europe, most average athletes. I'm not talking about the huge names like Ronaldo, Messi. I'm talking about normal athletes, normal professional athletes. They tend to date and marry, female male athletes because you know, honestly, I consider myself to be a very patient man. I probably will not be okay with a wife, in debt. It's a lot, man. That's what I'm trying to say. It's just a lot. And
Right.
normal people don't really like that. We love watching them on TV, but I don't want this in my home.
Right. Right. And you know what? I think it speaks to the intensity and the dedication that it
Yeah,
takes to be a high level athlete, right? That oftentimes what makes athletes so successful is what can cause problems in areas outside of athletics. So, I think that that's a large part of the work that I do, and it's been very rewarding though to see athletes improve and to help them not only, like I said, deal with issues, but also enhance their performance.
absolutely. So you were like walking the streets one day and you decided to be a therapist for athletes, or did something else led you there?
Well, not quite. So it's quite a long journey, right through the educational pathway. So, in the United States, it's different around the world, right? But in the United States, you have to obtain an undergraduate, 4-year college degree, which I did here at the University of Notre Dame. And then you go on to medical school, which is 4 years for MD medical school here in the US. And then from there, you choose your specialty. So, going in to medical school, I thought all along that I was going to, be, somewhere in sports medicine. I've always kind of grown up around athletics. I actually worked as a sports broadcaster for a while, but,
All
you know,
right.
right, right. So that was always the goal, right? And then once I realized that I was really interested in psychiatry, that really took off, and so that's kind of the pathway. So undergraduate, medical school, residency, and then I did additional sports psychiatry training, which then has led me to be where I am today.
No, and it's pretty amazing, and you're perfect for this channel because you your life was around sports in general. So I assume you love them. I personally hate sports. The only reason I'm working out is because it's good for my body. The last time I saw a soccer match was in 1998. And I even worked as a bartender in a sports bar. So that's how much I'm not watching it. Excuse me. But I can tell you do love that. And
Right, right. Yeah.
that was I'm giving you that example because I work out around between 4 and 5 times a week.
Mhm.
No, we have gym equipment here, and every time when I don't do the warm up properly, it's like painful afterwards. It's just important, and I'm now in my old age, I am not neglecting it, but when I was younger, I was just full of energy and study. It was a huge mistake, solid mistake.
Right, right. And yeah, I think that's a good point though too, that, I think a lot of times we think of athletes as only the professional level or Olympic level athletes, right? But there's a lot of people who are involved in athletic activities on a day-to-day basis, whether like yourself, it's to just maintain physical health and work on, building maybe muscle strength or endurance, right? But there's also a lot of social benefits, right, to staying active in groups or recreational activities, right, with sports. So definitely all levels of athletes, I think, can benefit from thinking about mental health and how that affects their performance. And, we know too, there's so much integration with physical health and mental health too. So it's all related. And I think just kind of speaks to how important of a topic this is.
Absolutely. Now, again, you're a very solid example. And the reason I'm going to ask, how did you knew that this was the way to go is the following one. I am sure you yourself have seen this. And people tend to go to colleges, university, because they have this mentality that once you graduate, your life will be way easier. In a way, that is so, but not necessarily.
Mhm.
And you're actually even a remarkable example because, like here in Europe, I graduated. My bachelor was from private college, and I was working as a bartender. With my monthly salary, I was able to cover the whole semester with 1 month, and that was a private college. When I went to Denmark for my master's degree, it was free. I didn't pay anything.
Mhm.
And I was about to start a PhD, but I didn't because I had some personal issues and problems in my life. But if I decided to do it, it would have been like 150, 60 euro per year.
Oh, well.
Which is like, I can't even buy cigarettes for that amount of money.
Right, right.
So, yeah. And I know that in the United States, things are not exactly like that when it comes to education. There are differences. But, the money aside, a lot of people, especially now, especially the last 10, 15 years, go into those institutions. I'm not against those institutions. I'm just highlighting the end result. And once you get out of there, you start something that it's not for you. Start a job you don't feel it's your place over there. And when you were single, young and single, I guess you can be miserable. You shouldn't be, but okay, it's part of life. But then you have a significant other, a husband or a wife, children, and that bad situation you're in, eventually it shows. You know perfectly well what I'm talking about. So the reason I'm asking is because sure, you love sports, obviously, but with a medical degree, with degree in psychiatry and a lot of experience, you've been in school for 8 years, so that's a lot of time. Obviously, brilliant and very smart guy. So you could have went in any other direction. Sure, sports is something you love again, but as you said, it's a huge sector. A guy with those skills, you're driven, you're determined. You could have went in any other direction, but why you decided to go there?
Yeah, no, it's an excellent question. I often think I have been asked the question, right? If I didn't do this, what else would I have done, right? And I struggle to answer the question a lot of times because I do feel like this was something that I felt called to do, especially in the field of medicine. So, growing up, I have always been, inclined, I think, to try to help other people, to serve other people in a way that, rewards me and makes me feel like, I'm creating a lasting impression on my community and the people around me, right? So that always drove that element. It also happened to be that I really enjoyed the sciences. I enjoyed, schoolwork and academic life, which, like, to be in school this long, frankly, I think you have to somewhat enjoy the process and all of that, what that entails, right? So it really became kind of the perfect marriage of that, science, math background, as well as a desire to help people and to serve people, especially those in need. So that's probably where that, kind of my main drive comes from. I will say, like you said, though, it's a path that does not suit everyone. It's a path that is
Yeah.
extremely expensive. To your point, I think most people in the U.S. that graduate from medical school have most often probably hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, which is obviously something that affects your quality of life, both short term
Yeah.
and long term, right? So it's a huge investment, and unfortunately, it's a system that does not facilitate. Like it doesn't grad not many doctors graduate each year, right? There's limited spots, there's limited government funding for training positions. So there's a lot of challenges, but I do find my work very rewarding. I do see myself as, like I said, as being called into this role for a variety of reasons. And I do feel like, if I'm able to make a difference and hopefully show others, that a path does exist to do work that I think is uniquely suited for my interests and abilities, then I'm very grateful to do that.
Solid. I have a few side questions about the work specifically,
Mhm.
without, of course, naming names, places, situations. Can you give me a few examples of the most common issues you're facing in your day-to-day life?
Oh, for sure, for sure. So, with athletes, I treat athletes all the way from the high school level to the professional and Olympic level. So, I would say though there are many commonalities between those
Yeah.
groups. So I would say probably the number one issue that presents is performance anxiety and anxiety in general, right? I think if you look at athletes, I think a certain level of anxiety is necessary to prepare
Yeah.
yourself to be driven, right? To motivate you to do all the work that it takes to be successful in athletics. But there does at some point become a line that gets crossed, right? Where that anxiety actually starts hurting the performance. So the big challenge is to determine where is that line and where is the athlete on that spectrum. So, we work through medications, through therapy, through different techniques to try to help the athlete channel that anxiety and that drive to achieve optimal success on the field or on the pitch or however they compete. So that's probably the number one issue. I would say a couple other top ones are ADHD and attention issues.
Yeah.
I think, in our world today, I think especially when you look at the preponderance of social media and the influence of all different technologies in our lives, I think attention is something that is highly scrutinized. So we're seeing a lot of attention issues. We're seeing a lot of, requests for ADHD evaluations and understanding how does that impact my performance level, right? And even some of the medications that we use, how do those impact my performance? So that's a big one. And then I think, a big one with athletics is the question of identity and role transitions.
How so?
So yeah, I get a lot of athletes come to me after a recent injury, after a recent retirement, maybe
Okay.
a trade or a transfer, right? Where there's some sudden change. So the athlete all of a sudden goes from competing every day at a high level to maybe say they tear their ACL, right? And now they can't compete. And now every day they're now in this rehab process, right? It's a sudden transition change where they're not able to do what they used to do. And that can be extremely challenging, right? On both the physical and mental side. So we do a lot of work with thinking about, what is an athlete's identity? How do they see themselves both within the sport and outside of the sport? And then how can we channel what the athlete does best and how they train and their best qualities to allow them to succeed at whatever their new phase of life is. So, whether that's the rehab process, whether that's life after retirement, right, or life with a new team or club. So that, I think is probably one of the biggest challenges for athletes when all of a sudden their life gets changed in some very meaningful way.
I sorry about it. I have interviewed a police officer some time ago, and he actually told me the same. He was, taking care of the mental health.
Hmm.
And yeah, now that I think about it, when you're injured or when you can, the case he was referring to was a police officer who was wounded
Hmm.
and he had to be in a wheelchair. So now he still working in the police department, but he has a desk job.
Hmm.
And it was a pretty solid shift. Now, I honestly never, because a police officer is out there all the time.
Right.
But I never really thought about that when it comes to athletes. I've
Right.
always just viewed them as people who are pretty good, physically, and they do it until they're almost 40 and then they
Right.
don't.
Right.
But I really never thought of that.
Right, right. I mean, if you think of the average lifespan obviously extends, nowadays into the 70s and oftentimes 80s and above. So, maybe an athlete's career, maybe less than half of their life is devoted to athletic competition. That's a lot of time afterwards to be able to face issues that come up often as a result of participating in sport. So, I think being a little bit more proactive about, before these changes occur, maybe before retirement, right? How do we plan for these things? How do we think about these things? And really develop athletes as well-rounded people in the sense that when these changes do occur, maybe there's a higher level of resilience, higher level of ability to bounce back and be well-rounded people that can lead, functional, happy lives for the lifespan.
Now that you mention, do you happen to know? I'm not sure if you have like data on it, but yeah, what do most average athletes do when their career is over? Sure, you can be like a trainer, but I mean, how many of them are going to actually like open a dojo, let's say, and
Right, right,
supply and demand. It's not like all of them can do it. So
right.
do you happen to know, like,
I'm not sure there's any kind of specific data. It's a pretty large group, but what I will say is, I mean, the athletics industry is pretty large, right? There's a lot of jobs in, sports broadcasting, sports management, that sort of thing. That's probably the most common pathway. Some athletes, do have other interests outside of athletics that, get pursued or along the way they study at university, that sort of thing. But many do really struggle with that challenge because, like I said before, athletics oftentimes requires a 100% devotion
yeah,
to that sport. And it doesn't leave time for other interests or other, time to plan for the future. So it is a major challenge. I think one that's gaining in recognition, but one that still has a lot of work to help the people that are most in need.
the most common issues that you've mentioned aside, in general, what is the biggest challenge? I'm not talking about the biggest challenge you had in your career. I'm
Mhm.
talking about what is the biggest challenge you're facing very often.
Sure, sure. I think that one's actually pretty easy. I think it's the idea of the stigma against mental health. And I
Yeah.
think, in the athletic community, especially, right, that there is this idea that has been longstanding, right, is obviously incorrect, but is widely pervasive, that, admission to mental illness or mental health struggles is seen as a weakness, right?
Yeah.
It's seen as something that you should be able to overcome with just more effort, more energy, more work. But we know now that that is often not the case, right? For a large group of individuals, that oftentimes more work, more effort can make things worse, actually. So, I think that that attitude is still a very significant barrier to athletes getting the care that they need, because that attitude often is not only sometimes shared by the athlete, it's shared by the coaches, the parents, the trainers, right?
Oh,
Everyone that's
everybody.
involved in an athlete's life. So I think, a lot of the work that I do is related to education, awareness, and trying to create environments within teams, within clubs, where athletes feel comfortable saying, "Hey, this is some things are not right here. We need to take a look at this." But definitely is probably the number one challenge that's faced by mental health professionals, especially in athletics.
Yeah. I myself was like that at some point, so I'm guilty of that too.
Sure, sure.
Um, but this whole, Jimmy, you cannot fix a problem if you cannot identify it.
Right, right.
And that's a good way to identify because it is a problem. And you
Hmm.
can see the results of those problems. And no disrespect to anyone, but you cannot be just, you've been working in a factory for 40 years doing the exact same thing every day, and you're telling me to man up and to, get over. I'm living a life that you will never be able to comprehend. Things are so dynamic and different. And it's sometimes it's frightening when you're up against something, a situation, for example, that you have no idea about. Because what you don't know scares you. This is how we are.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
this is never going to change. The unknown scares us.
Hmm.
It's not shameful to admit it. And when you don't know something and you just get over, how are you gonna get over a problem that you have no idea about? You don't even know what you're talking about. And in a lot of ways, not in those specific ways that you have described, but in a lot of ways, I'm guilty of that too. Because my ego won't allow me to convince myself that that's not how things should be. And you generate a lot of problems. As a matter
Right.
of fact, I started recently doing episodes again. I had to take a break for 3 months because I woke up one morning. It was 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, and the whole right eye wasn't there. It was like swollen. It was ridiculously painful.
Mm.
And like I don't need a doctor because I normally I don't like doctors.
Sure.
I'm not
Sure.
keep very keep personal, Jimmy. My
Yeah,
mother
sure.
is a dentist. My
Yeah.
grandparents were also doctors. I pretty much grew up in hospitals,
Right.
and I don't like it. But fairness, nobody likes it. You go to a
Right.
doctor when you have no other option. So I'm sure you understand that this isn't personal.
Right.
And when I went to the doctor, I went there 2 days after that because
Hmm.
now the pain was too much. And she said, well, it's a good thing you're here because you stayed a little bit longer, we, could have removed it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I'm 34. I don't want to lose my eye at the age of 34. This is ridiculous. But yeah, this mentality, like, yeah, get over it. Like, no, it's
Right.
wrong.
Right. 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 Now, I think that's a great point. I'm glad you're feeling better, but
Thank you.
yeah, I mean, it just shows the idea though, too, like you said, that I think you hit the nail on the head that what you don't know, we can't blame people for things they don't know.
I'm
Right.
not blaming them. Yeah.
Right. So I think though, but that's the key point that we have to really educate and we have to, make this widely understood for people, right? And that's a large task, right? That will take a lot of work, that will likely take time, more than any single person obviously can achieve, right? But we need to, I think, hopefully get to a point where people not don't just seek help when they're only in crisis, right?
Yeah.
It's oftentimes I mean, to be honest, a lot of my calls do come in when people have reached what they consider like a breaking point or rock bottom, right?
Yeah.
Where it's a lot harder, honestly, to treat those kind of cases and to work with those kind of people. And happy to do so, and then oftentimes it does work well. But I think the idea would be more of a preventative health type model where we're able to screen for problems, recognize problems early, and really promote education and health before we reach that, kind of red alert crisis point.
Yeah, because when you're already there, pretty much the damage is done.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
but before that happened with my eye, because I've always been in corporate finance and logistics, this is what I do. And
Mhm.
we always had those mandatory annual, physical checks.
Right. Mhm.
And I never really liked those. I like, well, I mean, I'm fine. And if I'm
Right.
not fine, I'll just go to a doctor. What do I need to go there now? And now I'm going, man. I'm going.
Right. 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 No, and I think that's extremely common, right? That's probably the most
Yeah.
common pathway. But that's where I said we're trying to shift the discussion a little bit to say too that this is not only about fixing problems, it's about elevating performance and really taking things to a higher level.
What you're doing is admirable. I hope I'm wrong, sir, but I don't think this will be resolved in my lifetime or yours.
Right.
I
Right.
think because it's a fairly new subject.
Sure. Sure.
I think it's like 50 years old subject. So there was I forgot the name. A very, very famous comedian. Said, "Man, don't go therapy. We just keep it inside and we die at the age of 65 from a heart attack, like real man." Like, of
Right.
course, he was joking about, but if you really think about it, that's the magic of satire because you're telling the
Right.
truth, and in that way.
Right. Right now, it's very common, and I agree with you. Like in many cases, it is an uphill battle, but I think we're seeing real signs of growth, and I think the discussion is definitely opening up. I think to a point that's very encouraging. So I'm hopeful, but obviously a lot of work still to go.
Can you draw a parallel between the athletes that you're treating, and because I'm sure you have colleagues in those fields, I'm sure you guys, well, not with details, but I mean, you are discussing cases. That's what everybody do.
Hmm.
Can you draw a parallel between athletes, firefighters, law enforcement officers, and soldiers?
Hmm. Right, right. It's interesting that you mentioned that. Part of my practice actually does involve seeing U.S. military veterans as well.
Okay.
So there are definitely significant parallels across the board. So I think you talk about individuals that are extremely hardworking, that are extremely dedicated, and kind of going back to what I mentioned before, individuals that what they do and their job becomes who they are as a person, right? If
You're
you're a
not
police
going
officer.
to be good in those jobs if it doesn't become who you are.
Right, right. For better or for worse, that is
Yeah.
your identity, right? So I think that that's probably the biggest commonality between them all. I mean, they're all, like I said, obviously hardworking, dedicated, that sort of thing. But I think it's that identity piece that really changes how you see things. And like we talked about before, it's, I sometimes like, so personally, I can say I'm not a military veteran, right? But, sometimes it is, I think, hard for them to relate to people outside of those groups, right? And that's why you think about things like group therapy and working within, structures where athletes can talk to other athletes and service members can talk to other service members, right? That understand really what they've gone through and can really relate on a human level.
No, this is ridiculously important. This is vital. And the worst thing you can do, not only if you're in a bad situation, even if you're in a good situation, the worst thing you can do is isolate yourself. We are social animals. We're not designed to be alone.
Right.
Although I personally, I don't think I've ever felt, being lonely, and I'm alone a lot, but I
Sure.
don't feel lonely at all. Um, like for example, but I'm a super isolated case. I am so much an indoors guy that COVID didn't change my life at all. I
Sure.
really didn't feel that. I've always had home office. Well, I mean, first, I guess that's not a fair statement because, I'm from Southern Europe, I'm from Bulgaria, and
Mhm.
we didn't have like real restrictions because
Sure, sure,
it's not gonna work here.
sure.
So I still, there's a nice lake next to my place. I'm still going there, I'm having a
Mhm.
nice time. But in general, I'm a little bit like that, but a lot of people were not because, that my case, that's not a normal case. In, in a normal environment, you shouldn't isolate yourself because it's dangerous.
Right, right. And, mental health is a little bit unique too, in that
Yeah.
the illness itself almost makes you want to isolate, right? And want to do things that will actually make the disease worse.
Yeah.
Right. It's a kind of a self-fulfilling cycle or prophecy sort of thing, right? So the illness makes it you want to isolate yourself, which makes it all the more important, right, to reach out. So there's been so much data on the idea of social health and interpersonal connections as being protective factors against mental illness and loneliness and even if you look at things like suicide rates, right? That kind of idea of having a social network, of having people that you can rely on, trust, talk to, is probably one of the most, if not the most important factor.
Absolutely. Now, Jimmy, I have a fourth question. I never put it in the invitation because I love the reaction. My fourth question is if you can give my audience one advice, my audience, people are sitting, wondering, is that job for me? Have I chosen the right profession? That kind of folk. If you can give them one advice, what will it be?
It's a great question. I would say from my experience and in my pathway, I've learned that your career path and your job path, has to make sense to you. I think it gets very easy to compare to other people or other people's expectations of yourself, right? But my job is pretty specific, and I think I've carved out a role that really aligns with what I value and what I think is important. And that doesn't mean that my job would be best for somebody else necessarily, right? Because they may have different ideas, different values, different resources. So I would say that the most important thing is to stay true to yourself, to understand yourself, spend time in reflection and thinking about, what makes you you and what is going to allow you to find fulfillment in life. And I would hope that that's probably the primary driver to things because no matter what you end up doing at the end of the day, right? You answer to yourself and it has to be something that leaves you fulfilled and feeling like you're making a difference in the world.
That's a perfect response. This is my philosophy. The only person I'm comparing myself to is the guy I was yesterday.
Right.
You don't
Right.
really know people. I have had friends for over 20 years, and I'm not in a bad relationship with them right now, but we just don't talk because we split ways. That's how it happens.
Hmm.
And now I'm hearing things about some that are like, I've known this guy for 20 years. They don't, I mean, nothing criminal, but just something, out of character. But it's not out of character because I never knew the real guy. So, you'd never know people. So comparing yourself to other people is pointless.
Right.
It's just not how we don't put all the cards on the table for good reason.
Right.
And
Right.
just compare yourself to what you were yesterday. It's way easier.
Definitely. Yeah, no, I think that that makes a lot of sense. And I agree. Like people are very complicated, dynamic individuals, right? And that should be reflected in what you do and what you pursue in life.
Right on. And with that said, Jimmy, it was an absolute pleasure to be with you and to hear your story. It's amazing. I wish you well.
Thank you so much, sir. Have a great day.
Guys, I hope this one was useful. Please follow the channel on YouTube, Rumble, Twitter, Gap, LinkedIn, and Facebook. Ring the bell and all the good stuff. Have a nice week ahead, and I'll see you next Sunday.